Have you ever visited a country where the past feels as alive as the present? Britain has a unique way of preserving traditions that, to outsiders, can seem completely out of place in the modern world. From ceremonies that have survived for centuries to customs that people follow without even questioning them, the United Kingdom often feels like a place where history never truly ended. To millions of visitors, these traditions appear confusing, unnecessary, or even amusing at first glance. But as this journey unfolds, you'll discover that behind every seemingly strange habit lies a fascinating story shaped by kings, queens, wars, religion, and an unwavering respect for heritage. And some of the most surprising traditions are probably not the ones you're expecting. What makes Britain so different is not simply that old traditions still exist, but that they continue to influence everyday life. In many countries, ancient customs have slowly disappeared or become little more than attractions for tourists. In Britain, however, many of them remain part of ordinary life, quietly woven into the culture without much explanation. That is why so many foreigners find themselves puzzled from the very first day. They notice people behaving in unexpected ways, participating in rituals that seem disconnected from the modern age, or following social rules that nobody ever explains aloud. The more closely you look, the stranger everything begins to seem. Yet there is one important detail that many visitors only realize much later. These traditions are not random relics from the past. They serve as invisible threads connecting generations across hundreds of years. They help define British identity in ways that even many locals struggle to describe. Throughout this video, you will discover traditions that leave tourists speechless, customs that often create awkward misunderstandings, and rituals whose true meanings are far more fascinating than their appearances suggest. Some of them might even change the way you see Britain forever. One of the biggest surprises for newcomers is that the strangest British traditions are often hiding in plain sight. They are not found inside castles or royal palaces, but in supermarkets, cafes, train stations, neighborhood pubs, and even simple conversations between strangers. Many foreigners arrive expecting historical monuments and afternoon tea, only to become fascinated by everyday behaviors that seem almost impossible to understand. Why does everyone queue so patiently? Why do people apologize even when nothing happened? Why is talking about the weather treated almost like an essential social skill? These habits may seem insignificant, but together they reveal a culture unlike almost any other. Tea, for example, is much more than a popular drink. While people around the world enjoy tea, in Britain, it has become a comforting ritual that appears during celebrations, stressful moments, family gatherings, workplace breaks, and even after bad news. To an outsider, offering someone a cup of tea after almost any situation may seem unusual, yet for many Britons, it represents kindness, reassurance, and a quiet way of showing support. The same can be said about the famous British queue. Standing in line is not simply about waiting your turn. It reflects fairness, patience, and respect for others. Accidentally breaking a queue may earn disapproving looks that speak louder than words. Then there is British politeness, which often confuses visitors the most. Foreigners quickly notice that people constantly say sorry, please, and thank you, even during situations where no apology is actually necessary. To someone unfamiliar with the culture, it can seem exaggerated or even insincere. In reality, these expressions help maintain social harmony and avoid unnecessary conflict. Understanding these small habits is the first step toward understanding Britain itself. But as unusual as everyday customs may seem, they are only the beginning. The traditions rooted in Britain's royal and historical past are even more surprising. Few countries blend monarchy and modern life quite like Britain. While many nations have left royal ceremonies behind, Britain continues to celebrate rituals that date back centuries, many of which still attract global attention. Visitors are often amazed to see elaborate military parades, ceremonial guards dressed in iconic uniforms, and ancient traditions carried out with extraordinary precision. At first glance, these events may appear to be little more than theatrical performances for tourists. However, each ceremony preserves stories of national identity, political continuity, and historical resilience that stretch back through generations. The famous changing of the guard is one perfect example. Countless tourists gather every day expecting an entertaining show, yet few realize that it remains an active military ceremony performed by fully trained soldiers. Their distinctive uniforms and disciplined movements symbolize continuity rather than spectacle. The same can be said for royal celebrations, state openings of parliament, and centuries-old ceremonial processions that continue to follow traditions established long before modern democracy took shape. To many foreigners, it seems extraordinary that customs originating in medieval times still influence public life in one of the world's most developed countries. What makes these rituals truly fascinating is not simply their age, but the way they reinforce a sense of stability during times of constant change. Governments come and go, technology transforms daily life, and society evolves rapidly, yet these ceremonies remain reassuring symbols of continuity for many Britons. Even those who rarely think about history often recognize that these traditions connect the present with a remarkably distant past. But while royal rituals are visible to everyone, Britain's most confusing traditions are often the invisible social rules that visitors accidentally break without ever realizing it. Some of Britain's most powerful traditions are never written down anywhere. Nobody hands tourists a guide explaining them, yet locals seem to understand them instinctively from childhood. These unwritten rules govern conversations, personal space, public behavior, humor, and even silence itself. Foreigners frequently discover them through uncomfortable moments rather than careful preparation. A joke delivered too directly, standing too close during a conversation, or speaking too loudly on public transport can immediately make someone feel out of place without knowing exactly why. British humor is another mystery that catches many visitors completely off guard. Sarcasm, understatement, and self-deprecating jokes are deeply woven into everyday conversation. Someone unfamiliar with this style may mistake a joke for criticism or fail to recognize when people are being intentionally ironic. Likewise, emotional restraint often surprises foreigners who come from cultures where enthusiasm and openness are expressed much more directly. In Britain, politeness sometimes means saying less rather than saying more, allowing subtle gestures and tone to communicate feelings that words never fully express. Perhaps the greatest challenge for visitors is realizing that these invisible customs rarely come with clear explanations. Instead, they are learned gradually through observation. The good news is that most Britons are remarkably forgiving when they recognize that someone is unfamiliar with local etiquette. In fact, many even enjoy gently explaining these cultural differences once the initial confusion has passed. And when you finally begin connecting these unwritten rules with Britain's long history, something remarkable happens. Customs that once seemed strange suddenly begin making perfect sense. By now, it becomes clear that Britain's traditions are not simply old habits preserved out of stubbornness. Each one represents a small piece of a much larger story that stretches across centuries of political change, cultural evolution, and national identity. What initially appears confusing often becomes surprisingly logical once its origins are understood. The famous queues reflect fairness. Endless cups of tea symbolize comfort. Royal ceremonies preserve continuity. Constant apologies reduce social friction. Even the country's famously reserved behavior developed through generations of cultural expectations that still shape modern life today. This is precisely why so many foreigners leave Britain with completely different opinions than they had when they first arrived. What once looked unusual gradually becomes familiar, and many visitors even find themselves adopting these traditions without noticing. They begin waiting patiently in queues, apologizing automatically after minor accidents, discussing the weather with strangers, and appreciating the quiet rhythm of British politeness. The customs that originally caused confusion slowly transform into habits that make everyday interactions feel smoother and surprisingly comforting. The next time you encounter a British tradition that seems impossible to understand, remember that appearances rarely tell the full story. Behind every unusual custom lies centuries of history, unexpected cultural influences, and values that continue to shape one of the world's most recognizable societies. And chances are, there are still many fascinating British traditions that even lifelong visitors have never discovered. That is exactly what makes Britain such an endlessly intriguing place to explore.